Welcome to SCDDSN 212DD and 60401DD Consumer Personal Funds and Property Training. This training has been created by SCDDSN Internal Audit. SCDDSN Internal Audit has two numbers in which a person can contact the division. Please make note of them on the slide. Internal Audit provides a number of different services to the agency and its providers. Some of these services comes in the form of an audit. An audit can consist of any number of issues from consumer personal funds and property to service coordination and day programs. With an audit, the final report is issued to the executive director, the provider's board of directors, DDSN agency director, DDSN executive management, DDSN commission members, and is available to anyone who requests a copy under the Freedom of Information Act. Internal Audit also provides technical assistance and training. Technical assistance consists of the executive director giving Internal Audit a call because they might need additional assistance with the situation. This type of visit only requires Internal Audit to provide a letter to the executive director. Internal Audit also provides on-site training to any provider that requests it. We provide consumer personal funds and property training, Medicaid fraud training, and ethics and conflicts of interest training. Please call the office if your agency would like to request an on-site training. The first half of this training will cover the requirements of SCDDSN Directive 212DD Consumer Personal Funds. When Internal Audit goes on a site visit, one of the first things the auditor may ask for is the financial plan. The financial plan is like a blueprint of how a particular consumer funds are to be managed. The plan will let us know if a consumer is capable of handling funds, whether they can identify money, and how much help do they need from staff to complete a transaction. The financial plan should be a budget and let the auditor know how much money is going into a consumer's account and how much money is coming out of the consumer's account. It should let a person know what fees the consumer is responsible for and what exactly does room and board cover. The financial plan should let us know how much a person's weekly spending is. This should be a specific dollar amount, not a range. But remember, weekly spending is not the same as how much money a person is capable of handling. Weekly spending is just what that person needs for the week. Therefore, there should be two dollar amounts in the financial plan. One for weekly spending and another for how much money the person is capable of handling. The financial plan should be a tool used to adequately plan on how to spend funds to ensure that a person stays Medicaid eligible. Special circumstances that should be addressed in a consumer's financial plan are when the provider is not representative payee. That means mom, dad, or a guardian is managing the consumer funds. All of our consumers residing in a residential facility should have a financial plan, whether the provider is representative payee or not. Another item that should be addressed in the financial plan is when a consumer is to keep more than $50 cash on hand. Also, if there are any funds received that are not going to be deposited into the checking account, this should also be addressed in the financial plan. Anytime consumer funds is used to pay for staff expenses, this should also be noted in a financial plan. If there are any questions on which staff expenses can be paid for with consumer funds, please contact Internal Audit to receive further clarification. The next couple of slides are examples of simple financial plans. These forms are available in Internal Audit if a provider would like a copy of them. Please note in all cases we should have a copy of these three forms: Statement of Financial Rights, Authorization to Manage Funds, and Authorization to Apply for and Manage Entitlements and Benefits. Bank accounts. A bank account must be set up for each consumer. The account may be checking or savings, but keep in mind that if a savings account is being used, usually there is a limited number of checks that can be written from the account before the consumer is charged a fee. The bank account must be kept separate from the provider's account. The account should identify that it is for the consumer by either just having the consumer's name alone on the account. This will signify that he can handle all aspects of banking alone, or have the account set up to show fiduciary relationship. The following two examples in bold shows fiduciary relationship. Joint accounts are not allowed with staff members. We are never to benefit from the death of a consumer, and in the case of a joint account, if the consumer passes away, the second person on the account automatically receives the funds. Also, a copy of the bank signature card will be kept on file for all consumers with bank accounts. Also dealing with bank accounts, co-signatures are required on all checks for those consumers needing help with banking. Consumers may pay reasonable bank check and service charges. In most cases, though, many banks will waive or lower the service charges our consumers would have to pay. Providers should work with local banks to find the best deal. Consumers should have reasonable access to his or her money. This just means that if a consumer was living in the upstate and transferred to a home in the coastal region, his bank should not still be at the local bank in the upstate. Collective accounts are allowed with SC-DDSN approval. This approval must be obtained from SC-DDSN Finance Office. If there are collective accounts out there, a complete sub-account of records are required and no fees can be charged to the consumers who participate in the collective account. Also, consumers whose money is in a collective account should be earning interest, and the provider needs to show that the collective account would not be detrimental to the consumer and that it will be beneficial to the provider. Transactions. Receipt of funds. Any monies received must be deposited. All deposits must be made within 5 days of receipt of funds. Do not withhold cash from any deposit. For cash needs, you need to write a separate check to the consumer from his or her account. Direct deposit is always encouraged. The more accounts we can set up on direct deposit, the less trips we need to make to the bank. And make sure you record all deposits in the check register at the time of the deposit, not at bank reconciliation time. Transactions, payments. A check will be written from the consumer's accounts for each week's spending money. The check will be made payable to the consumer, and weekly spending should be noted on both the check and in the check register. You should never ever write a check to cash. All major purchases must be made by check. Make sure to always retain a receipt for all purchases made on behalf of the consumer. Ensure that you write the name of the consumer on the check as well on each receipt. Do not write out any checks to staff without a receipt for the purchase. Another staff should note on each receipt that the items were received by the consumer. Make sure to pay all provider fees by check and ensure that all checks written are co-signed in accordance with their plan. Make sure you record all checks in the check register at the time the check is written, not at bank reconciliation time. How to keep a check register checkbook. Make entries using black or blue ink. No pencil, no erasable ink, no purple and green inks, and no gel pens. These are books of original entry for Social Security purposes and must have the ability to last a while. Therefore, we should always use just black or blue ink. Never use whiteout. Make the entry in the check register at the time that the check is written or at the time that the deposit is made. Always keep a running balance in the check register. This will prevent you from bouncing checks. When you make a mistake in the check register, line through it and make the correct entry on the next available line in the check register. If a check needs to be voided, write void across the face of the check and cut off the signature portion of the check. Shred and throw away this section. Also, make an entry in the check register stating that that particular check was voided and retain the voided check on file with the bank statement. Bank reconciliations of a consumer's accounts. Reconciliations must be completed within 10 business days of receipt of the bank statement. Reconciliations must be done by a staff person who is not authorized to co-sign on all checks. Accounts must be reconciled within $5. However, if you are out of balance 1 month, the next month you will probably be even more out of balance. Therefore, we always recommend that you reconcile an account to the penny. Follow up on any accounts not reconciled within $5. Be sure to notify the Facility Program Director, the Consumer Service Coordination or QMRP, and the Executive Director. If the problem is still unresolved after 5 additional working days, the Executive Director should notify the district office. Reconciliations must be documented. The reconciler should sign or initial and date the check register. Reconciliations must be performed on all accounts, whether it is checking and/or a savings account. Even if the account has no activity, a reconciliation still must be performed and documented. Bank reconciliations of collective accounts. Reconciliation will be completed within 15 days after the month end. Reconciliation of collective accounts will be done by provider finance staff not authorized to receive or disperse any funds contained in the collective account. Accounts must be reconciled within $50, but once again we strongly recommend that the accounts be reconciled to the penny. Reconciliations will be made between the collective account as a whole and the bank where the funds are on deposit. Reconciliation must document that the consumer sub-account balances agree to the total collective account balance. Follow up any problems with the Executive Director. The Executive Director will follow the guidelines for reporting unresolved problems with consumers' accounts. Reconciliations must be documented. These are a couple of slides that shows how a reconciliation should be performed. It does not matter which forms you use, just make sure that you can document that a reconciliation is being performed monthly. Cash on hand. Maximum cash on hand for each consumer will be stated in their plan. Per the directive, the consumer's maximum cash on hand cannot exceed $50 without programmatic justification. Cash on hand includes both cash at the residence and cash in the consumer's possession. Cash on hand is not the same as weekly spending allowance, so you can have a cash on hand balance as well as weekly spending money. Records must be kept for cash held on behalf of a consumer. Cash on hand records must be kept separate from the actual cash. This is for theft purposes. If the cash is stolen, at least the ledger was in a different location so that we could at least have a record of how much money to reimburse the consumer. Counts of cash will be performed at least monthly by staff who does not hold cash or keep the records. Counts will be documented in the cash record. Staff performing the cash count should sign or initial and date the cash record. This is a sample of a cash on hand log. Make sure the form you use incorporates everything on this sample form. Maintaining records. We must keep receipts for all purchases. Receipts are required for all purchases made on behalf of a consumer. We need to make sure to keep all receipts with the monthly bank statement. We also need to keep validated deposit tickets, canceled checks, and a copy of the bank signature card. We need to keep bank statements, reconciliations, cash on hand records, and all supporting documentations on file for 6 years after the termination of the SCDDSN contract. Contracts can be between 1 to 5 years, so it is possible to have to keep client records up to 11 years. Also, keep any other information that would be useful. Reporting to the consumer. Give the consumer a report of his or her financial activity at least quarterly. The report should cover all income and expenditures by major categories and account balances. This report may be used as an information source for financial planning and monitorship. This report must be documented. The next couple of slides are some examples of quarterly reports that may be used. Transfer or discharge. Within 5 days, you should send the most current statement of the consumer's financial position to his or her new residence. Within 5 days, also send a check for the available balance in the consumer's account to his or her new residence. The available balance is the current account balance less expected obligations, bills or checks not yet paid. After 60 days, send a check for the balance, if any, in the consumer's account to the new residence. All outstanding bills should be resolved by this time. Please ensure to close the consumer's account at this time as well. Death of a consumer. Within 10 days, notify probate judge and other interested parties. Notification should include the following information: a complete listing of the deceased person's financial assets and obligations, including fees owed to the provider, the name and address of the parent, guardian, or next of kin, and a request for legal authorization for any disbursement of consumer funds. Probate courts do vary from county to county, so ensure that you follow what your probate judge wants in your particular county. We have finished the requirements for 212DD. We will now talk about the SC-DDSN Directive 60401DD, Consumers' Personal Property. Consumers' Personal Property. Ensure that property records are updated for additions and deletions as they occur. Inventory should be performed quarterly, not yearly. Large dollar items should be maintained on property records, $50 or more. Record serial and/or model numbers for appropriate items. And maintain the value for large dollar items from receipts on the personal property record. This is for insurance and theft purposes. This is an example of a personal property record. The next 2 slides explains and shows how the form should be completed. The next 4 slides will cover some frequently asked questions. Please read through them, and if you require any further explanation, please contact SC-DDSN Internal Audit. Things to look for. These are a couple of items you should look for when handling consumer funds. Canceled checks. Is the bank returning the checks? Is the staff co-signing checks? Are the checks being endorsed by the consumer? Bank account reconciliations. Who performs them? Who reviews them? And who monitors them? Shopping trips. Who signs checks versus who takes the consumer shopping? And when is shopping done? Is it done by a staff person off duty? Is it done 2 o'clock in the morning? Weekly spending checks. Who signs checks? Who takes consumers to cash checks? Does staff take checks and cash them for the consumer? Out-of-town trips. Beach, Carowinds, home visits, etc. If a consumer cannot handle money, have parent guardian sign for large sums of money. Receipts from parents. Do not make any payments to parents if they do not have receipts. The provider is representative payee, which means that we are responsible to Social Security for how funds are spent. Therefore, the provider should not be giving parents advances for shopping trips. Group purchases. Who owns it? How do you split it when one consumer leaves? We should be discouraging group purchases. Fraud tips. Here are 10 tips that can help a provider prevent or detect fraud. Number 1. Have a written code of ethics. This way everyone knows and understands how they should behave. Number 2. Set a good example. People are always watching, and therefore you always want to make sure you are setting a good example on and off the clock. Number 3. Have reasonable expectations. Don't expect people to do something that you would never do. Number 4, treat employees well. Always treat a person like how you would want to be treated. Number 5, restrict bank account access. Make sure you lock up all blank checks and check registers, and there is restricted access to financial information. Number 6. Perform regular bank reconciliations. This is a sure way to ensure that you catch mistakes or theft timely. Number 7. Adequately secure inventory and supplies. Number 8. Adequately pre-screen employee applicants. Number 9. Give employees a way to report fraud. Employees understand mandated reporting to SLED, but what about those ethical violations? Who do employees report to? And number 10, have internal audit examine the books, providers, and/or consumer books. Internal audit is available to provide assistance where needed. What is needed to manage consumer funds and property? Program team involvement, approvals of trips and purchases. Make sure everyone knows what is going on. If there is a question about a receipt or expenditure, do not accept a verbal explanation unless it is corroborated by at least one other staff member. Make sure there is a system in place for monitoring receipts and expenditures. Make unannounced visits. Do surprise cash counts. And please call internal audit if there are any questions or doubts about what is acceptable.